Ignition. We have liftoff.
Pitching downrange.
What's up, everyone? Today I'll be teaching you how to make a rocket and some of the physics behind it. However, the rocket will be very bare bones, and in the next video I will expand upon this and teach you guys how to make a more advanced rocket than the typical model rocket you can buy at the store. For this video I will be following this research paper that I wrote. The link is in the description. Solid rocket motors are made of multiple key components: the grains, the casing, the forward closure, and the nozzle. Each of these are vital to the success of a solid rocket motor. However, the motor I am making will use both the outside of the grain as a closure for the fuel and as a casing for the motor, since I'm not going to spend money on a tiny aluminum tube when I can buy a larger aluminum tube for future motors. Grains. Solid rocket motors use grains to create low-speed, high-pressure gases. The grains are what contain the fuel. A grain needs a hole in the fuel, of any shape, that will increase the surface area and allow the grain to burn better. The grains of a rocket motor are made by casting melted fuel into a mold that will shape the hole and size of the grain. Then you have to wait a few days for the fuel to properly solidify and set. After that, the grain will be removed from the mold. However, it will keep the tube it was poured into so that the structure of it is not broken. I will be using a little cardboard tube as both the casing and the tube that the fuel will be poured into. The casing. Solid rocket motors use casings to contain the high-pressure, high-temperature gases. Without these, solid rocket motors would explode and/or melt due to the high pressures and high temperatures. The casing also holds everything in place. It holds the grains, the nozzle, and the forward closure. As I have said before, I'm using a little cardboard tube as both the casing and tube for the grain. The nozzle. The nozzle is what generates thrust from the grain. It converts high-pressure, low-speed gas into low-pressure, high-speed gas. This is what generates most of the thrust in the solid rocket motor. The design of the nozzle changes how much pressure is in the casing and how much thrust you generate. My nozzle has been designed to generate around 11 pounds of thrust without surpassing the maximum pressure of a cardboard tube. It operates at around 180 psi during combustion.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts.
Combustion. Combustion occurs when oxygen and hydrogen combine and are ignited. This combustion is what creates the high-pressure, low-speed gases in the grain. The combustion takes place in the combustion chamber, or the hole that is put in the grain. The oxygen for combustion events in my rocket motor comes from the oxidizer, and the hydrogen comes from the fuel. The oxidizer and fuel are pre-mixed, so there is no complicated mixing process. Solid rocket fuel. Fuel in any rocket ever contains hydrogen. In a solid rocket motor, the fuel and oxidizer are already mixed, so it can be called a monopropellant, or more commonly fuel, since monopropellant is set aside for liquid usually. The fuel for my rocket motor is a variant of KNSB, potassium nitrate and sorbitol propellant. The reason it is a variant is that you can have varying amounts of potassium nitrate and sorbitol and any additive, and it'd still be a mixture of potassium nitrate and sorbitol. Mine uses the typical 35-65 oxidizer to fuel ratio. The potassium nitrate is the oxidizer and sorbitol is the fuel. The standout features of mine is that I use 45% milled and 55% granular potassium nitrate, and that I am using iron oxide as an additive. Once all these things are put together with 1% additive and mixed, it will be melted on a pan at around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then casted into the grain. Additives. Additives are added to solid rocket fuel for a number of various reasons. Sometimes it's just to add cool sparks or a long smoke trail, but other times it is done to improve the way the fuel burns. In my case, I am using red iron oxide at 1% to increase the burn rate. Other colors of iron oxide are harder to obtain and more expensive. Also, I just haven't seen many people using it. So that is why I'm using red iron oxide, rather than, say, white or yellow. We've made it to part 3, and if you stick around for just a few more minutes, you'll have everything you need to know on how to make a very bare bones rocket. Let's begin. Without a nose cone or fins, a rocket will have no stability and have high drag, slowing it down. The bumpy ride could cause the rocket motor to malfunction. It will probably spin out of control. Nose cones. Nose cones are put on a rocket to reduce drag, leading to a smoother ride. When the air hits it, it is pushed to the side and keeps most of the air from brushing off the body of the rocket. The best shape of a nose cone below supersonic speeds has a rounded curve. The best shape for a nose cone at supersonic speeds has a sharp point. Since nose cones on rockets are designed to push air out of the way, and my rocket is not going supersonic, I will be using a common parabolic nose cone with a rounded point. Fins. Fins are what stabilize a rocket. They keep the rocket pointing up. If the rocket turns to the right, fins will generate lift in the opposite direction, pointing it back up. There are multiple different kinds of fins for rockets: trapezoidal fins, elliptical fins, clip delta fins, and rectangular fins. I will be using clip delta fins. They basically are just right triangles with a square or rectangle at the bottom that creates a trailing edge. It is both durable and efficient, making for an excellent fin design. Congratulations! You now know how to make a rocket and some of the physics behind it. That's going to wrap it up for today's video. Thank you for watching.